All right, so I too I'm thankful for you guys all coming out. It's a rainy night and we have a full house, so thank you very much. And I'm also thankful for the opportunity to get to share the floor, if you will, with Dr. Kenneth Williford. He's an eminent scholar. I got a chance to read, I was very busy, I didn't have a whole lot of time, but I had a chance to read through some of what he's written, and most of it was just right over my head. So we're all blessed to have the opportunity to be here with a man of that intellect. So the question is, why am I a Christian? I'm a Christian because I think Christianity best explains reality. And that's not how I initially came to Christianity. For me, initially, it was largely a matter of experience and emotion. But then a little of life happened, and my experience was no longer quite so joyful, and I began to doubt everything. I wondered if I had any rational foundation for my faith, or if I had just accepted Christianity because I grew up in a culture that was amenable to the Christian worldview. So I started doing research, and eventually I became convinced that the Christian worldview was true and was verifiable. Now here are my opening remarks. I'm going to be developing a case for the theistic worldview, which is a necessary condition for the Christian worldview. And then Dr. Williford is going to be asking me questions specific to Christianity, and at that point I will be arguing for the Christian worldview specifically. But I think it's important, whatever worldview we're considering, to understand that any worldview minimally has to answer 5 questions. How the universe came to exist, how humanity came to exist, is there any purpose to life, how best to live life, that's morality, and what happens in the end. Ultimately, where's this all going for us and for the universe? And so that's where I want to begin. But I would say this. Any worldview has to answer those questions, and how it answers those questions will be dramatically impacted by whether it accepts or rejects a God like the Christian God. Regardless of what anyone wants to think about God, you and I are here, and we are caught up in this causal chain. That's a chain of events being propagated by cause and effect. Even if there were no God, this would still be our reality. And this causal chain must have a beginning, else it would not begin and therefore not exist. But since we're here, we can say that this chain of events exists, and therefore it had a beginning. Alexander Vilenkin, one of the world's most notable theoretical physicists and not a believer, says this: with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There's no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. In his general theory of relativity, Einstein's math proved the universe had a beginning. But there are metaphysical and theological implications to a universe with a beginning, and so Einstein just fudged his math in an equation he aptly named the cosmological constant. He later came to admit that this was the greatest blunder of his career and famously said, "I now see the necessity of a beginning," end quote. And we could go on and on with quotes, but suffice it to say that all observable and theoretical evidence, all of it, calls for a beginning to the universe. Now with that, I want us to think about this causal chain that you and I are caught up in. If thing 4 was created by thing 3, and thing 3 was created by thing 2, and thing 2 was created by thing 1, then thing 1 exists without explanation. Whatever thing 1 is, it is self-existent, eternal, and without a cause. It would have to be if it is the first thing. Otherwise, thing 1 would have a cause, and that cause would precede thing 1. And then we would have to ask, well, what caused this cause? And this would go on forever. In a universe with a beginning, it's necessary that there is a first thing, and that first thing then has to be a self-existent, eternal first cause. By the way, you should know that this is not even really controversial. It's hard to wrap your mind around this concept of an eternal first uncaused thing. But for all of recorded history, virtually every serious thinker has conceded this point. Even modern militant atheist and theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss, who wrote the book A Universe from Nothing, even he concedes this point. Because if there's not a first eternal thing, then you are locked into this infinite regress. And this causal chain to which we are all a part, it never begins, and therefore never exists. Most have thought, in one way or another, the universe, or some small part of it at least, is that thing which has always existed, thing 1. But now we know the universe had a beginning, and as Einstein said, would need a beginner. Robert Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer, physicist, and cosmologist, had this to say: astronomers now find that they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all of this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. Get this, that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact, end quote. The universe had a beginning, and the cause of the universe would have to be external to and independent of the universe that it created. I mean, this cause caused nature. Therefore, the cause necessarily is above or beyond nature. Inescapably, then, this is a supernatural cause. That's why Jastrow, who was not a believer, said that science had now proven a supernatural force. Also, the cause of the universe must have a mind in order to plan, and it must have a will in order to act on those plans, which would make the cause of the universe personal. Now, I realize for some of you, that's a bit of a stretch, and so I want to give you some evidence for that. When physicists and cosmologists look at the fundamental constants of our universe, such as the law of gravity, the strong and weak nuclear force, etc., they say that these constants appear to be intentionally set with incredible precision. That is to say, exactly as they would need to be set in order for complex life to exist in this universe. Fred Hoyle, the famed atheist and Royal British astronomer, said this: a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question, end quote. Paul Davies, agnostic physicist and cosmologist, says this: there is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming, end quote. Now some say, hogwash, there is no fine-tuning, we're here, we should expect the universe to allow for our existence. But this misses the point entirely. The question is, how best to explain a universe like this? Physical necessity cannot explain why the constants, the law of gravity, etc., are set just so. The precise values of these constants could be set otherwise. In fact, the universe with these settings is so incredibly improbable that there are no odds for this. In order to get a universe like this by chance, you have to multiply the probabilities for each of the 20 plus constants. So you have to take 10 to the 60th. That's a 1 with 60 zeros behind it. And you have to multiply that magnificent number times 10 to the 120th. And then you have to multiply the product of that equation times 10 to the 10 to the 123rd. And that's just 3 of the 20 plus constants. There are no odds for this. And so we can safely say that the fine-tuning of the universe cannot be explained by chance, and it cannot be explained by physical necessity. Design, then, would be the logical inference, but instead we generally flee like frightened animals to a multiverse explanation in hopes of staving off the design and the designer. A multiverse explanation posits millions or even an infinite number of universes, assuming that with this ensemble of universes, our chances of getting one just-so universe get better. Atheist and astrophysicist Stephen Hawking says, the general multiverse explanation is simply naive deism, dressed up in scientific language. Both deism and the multiverse appear to be an infinite, unknown, invisible, and unknowable system. The theory is not testable, not even in any foreseeable future, end quote. To be clear, there is no evidence for the multiverse at all. It's conjecture, almost on the order of a fairy tale. Moreover, physicists tell us that even if there were a multiverse, it would have a beginning and it would have to be fine-tuned. So even if you had a multiverse, you still need a personal creator. So with that, I think we can say that the fine-tuning of the universe is not attributable to physical necessity or chance, and because the multiverse, if it existed, would still need to be fine-tuned, an eternal, supernatural, personal creator, much like what we see in the God of Christianity, is still necessary to explain our existence and the existence of our universe. And please note that I have intentionally been quoting only atheist and agnostic scientists. I've been doing that because though they are biased against my worldview, they still understand reality, given their discipline, in a way that is consistent with biblical theism and inexplicable on atheism. Atheism is equally in trouble when we move from cosmology to biology. How do we explain the existence of mankind? If there is no God, evolution is our only option. But there are significant problems with evolution as the explanation for life, and chief among them would be abiogenesis, also called spontaneous generation. Some of you thought we got rid of that hundreds of years ago. No, in fact, we need spontaneous generation if we're going to explain the existence of life apart from a God as a consequence of evolution. Abiogenesis, or spontaneous generation, attempts to explain how the organization of a cell and elements within the cell could occur naturally, producing life from non-life. Initially, it was thought that life might be chemically predestined by the chemical attraction which exists among life's chemical parts. We now know that to be false. The arrangement of cellular components has nothing to do with chemical attraction and has everything to do with the genetic information in DNA. When Francis Crick and James Watson discovered the DNA structure, they were flabbergasted by the design. This was a language. And Francis Crick, an atheist, famously argued that the best explanation for DNA, in that it was inexplicable from intelligence, was that DNA had been brought to Earth by aliens through space travel. And Christians are supposed to be the superstitious ones. And it's not just Francis Crick, it's Carl Sagan, Sir Fred Hoyle, and Richard Dawkins, just to name a few notables. And they buy this atheist theory called panspermia because without an intelligent cause, there's no explanation for the sequence-specific information in DNA. It's a language. And by the way, the whole evolution enterprise depends on the mutation of DNA. But DNA is inexplicable, as we just heard, without an intelligent cause. So even if evolution were the explanation or the mechanism by which all of life eventuated, you still need something very much like a Christian God to create and design DNA. Now, I'm almost out of time, so I can only briefly sketch out what follows. But if unguided evolution is the explanation, then we are simply the consequence of blind evolutionary forces and all prior chemical molecular processes. Ladies and gentlemen, if that's true, we are determined. We're determined by chemistry and the laws of physics. And by the way, this is the consistent view of atheists. Daniel Dennett, Bertrand Russell, Sam Harris, Michael Ruse, Richard Dawkins, Galen Strauss, and Francis Crick, and on, what they believe and what you must believe, what must be true, if we are the consequence of all prior chemical molecular processes, is that there are no objective morals, only subjective feelings. You can't get an ought from an is. Consequently, you have no rights. There's no objective meaning to life. You can make up your own meaning, but that's the lie you tell yourself. You are a useless passion, quoting Sartre. Because you are determined by chemistry and the laws of physics, free will is an illusion. Therefore, you cannot choose between a rational and an irrational statement. Therefore, you can't possibly know truth. And if unguided evolution, then love is the trick your genes have played on you. Love is the consequence of natural selection preferring an advantage for mating and child rearing for the propagating of the species. You love no one, and no one loves you. And you're not conscious. Free will and consciousness are both an illusion. You are nothing but a sack of neurons that is derivative of an accidental association of atoms. You're a wet robot. Remember, this is not what I believe. These are almost direct quotes from the atheists I just referenced. This is wildly counterintuitive. Everything you know must be false in order for atheism to be true. And as a worldview, atheism cannot answer any of those 5 worldview questions satisfactorily. To less than a minute. So if you feel like you're a real person who makes decisions, who can distinguish truth and morality, who has rights and loves others, then as an informed atheist, you're living a contradiction. And if you can't live as if your worldview were actually true, it's likely that your worldview does not reflect your reality. It seems to me we need a God like the God of Christianity. And it's necessary for that God to exist to explain reality. Thank you. I guess I went over this.